Slider Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Thank you so much for being here. We had a great show for you yesterday. We mentioned this briefly. I want to go into greater detail. Randolph, New Jersey. It's about 90 minutes west of Manhattan. A school board, the school board, voted unanimously to remove the names of all the holidays from the calendar. They're gone. All the holidays are gone. Well, they're there, right? But so I mean, you got Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, Memorial Day. I'm hesitant to say it out loud because this episode may be deleted off of the internet, but Columbus Day. They're still there. They're now just labeled day off. So I want to go deeper into this. This story makes perfect sense, and other school districts surely will follow. It makes perfect sense. This is another example of destroying our national character. This is what the left does. This is what the woke do. This is what the cultural Marxists do. They must destroy our shared anything. Bottom line, the goal of the left, the goal of the Marxist left, is to divide. We, as a tribe of Americans, we want to unite. The Marxists want to divide. And they will do everything in order to divide us. Race is an obvious one, right? One way to divide us is to destroy the things that are uniting us. So what are some things that unite us? Well, religion used to be one of those things. I'll talk about that one coming up in just a minute. Shared cultural icons is one thing that we're united on, right? So we can have lots of different agreements, we can have lots of disagreements about lots of different things, but everyone loves Dr. Seuss, right? Well, not anymore. Dr. Seuss was canceled a couple weeks ago. The Betsy Ross flag is racist. Johnny Appleseed is racist. He's an imperializer, right? All of our shared cultural heroes, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, all the statues torn down, our founding fathers, the Federal Reserve. It was just released the other day. They had an internal memo instructing employees to not use offensive terms. And among the offensive terms was founding fathers. We got to cancel it all. There's some activist the other day who tried to problematize apple pie. Literally, as American as apple pie, of course they have to go over that because that's a thing that unites. His argument was that like apples come from Europe or the Middle East, and it's like a colonizing influence. And then Johnny Appleseed was planting this murderous fruit all over America because he's a genocidal colonizer, and nothing's safe because the left has to destroy everything that unites us. Another thing we're united about is holidays. Every country, every culture has their own unique holidays, right? I mean, these are important. There are in a culture and important dates in history or important people in history that we take time out to unify around and celebrate. It's a great thing. We have our own holidays here in America, and now they're gone. Now it's just day off. The flag is another one, right? It was Flag Day yesterday. Do you remember the American flag? You maybe haven't seen it in a long time. Remember that MSNBC reporter, this New York Times editorial board member talked about how disturbed she was when she saw some American flags. It's a beautiful flag we used to have. It was nice. It was a rectangle, red and white stripes, and like the top left was like a blue box, and it had 50 stars in it. Pretty crazy. They were able to fit 50 stars. That's the flag. I don't know if you remember it. The American flag. That's what it used to be. We have a new flag now of America. You see it everywhere. I see it everywhere I go. It's this rainbowy flag. But even that's not safe. Right? Have you seen the new versions of the pride flag? First, it started off with the pride flag. Then we've moved. That's the new flag of America. Then we have this new one, which is it's called the progressive pride flag. And now we have the third. Now we have the third iteration of this one. Check this one out. This is the newer one. There. My eyes! I can't take my. That's the new American flag, right? Why? Because we just have to destroy everything. Just destroy it all. Back to holidays. I don't want to understate this. The holidays are extremely important to a tribe, right? Things are crazy, chaotic, hectic, go, go, go. And then whew, Memorial Day. All right, awesome. Let's unite and pay tribute to the veterans who have paid the ultimate price. Oh, America's a colonizing apartheid state that commits war crimes. Jeez. You can't, like, nothing say, okay, fine. What's the next holiday? Can we just look forward to the next? Oh, good. We can unite around the 4th of July. This is great. This is the founding of America. The Declaration of Independence was signed. Oh, 1619's our true founding, when the first slave came to the New World because of the white man. Okay, all right. Next, what's the next holiday? Can we just move on to the next? Labor Day. Okay, that's a good Marxist holiday. We'll celebrate the workers of the world uniting. Great. What's the next one? Ooh, Columbus Day. Yeah, definitely kid. Christopher Columbus is the worst person who ever walked the face of the earth, we're told. So you see how that works? And they keep going until literally everyone's exhausted. And everyone's just like, you know what? Whatever. It's just day off. I don't care. Now, what's next after that? So we had these days that had great meaning and significance, right? 4th of July, it's the ratifying of the Declaration of Independence, which was one of the most beautiful works of art in American history that has brought liberty to generations of people here and around the world. It's one of the most amazing things ever done in human history. And now it's just day off, right? It's meaningless. It means nothing. This day is now an empty vessel. Well, what do we do with empty vessels? We fill them with something. Nature abhors a vacuum, right? So we have this empty vessel, day off. We can't have that, so we got to fill it with something. So now what they're going to do, these cultural Marxists, they flip everything on their head, which we'll get to in a minute. They flip it all on their head, and now they're going to fill that space with something else. So now, it's same thing, Christopher Columbus. They didn't say, let's get rid of Columbus Day, right? It's now Indigenous Peoples Day. Same thing here. They're going to get rid of the 4th of July and call it like Genocide Day or something. I don't know, Harvey Milk Day, right? They're going to fill it with something. And that's how you win a cultural revolution without firing a shot. Tell me I'm exaggerating. Tell me I'm exaggerating. So what is this? That was me peeking over, seeing how much time I have. And how much time do I have to explain this? Because this is incredibly important. Let's back it up. Antonio Gramsci. We got to know this guy. You got to know who this guy was. He was a Marxist philosopher. He was a founding member of the Communist Party in Italy. He was their one-time leader. He was thrown in jail by Mussolini in 1926. He stayed there for 11 years where he died. When he was in prison, he wrote a lot. And he's influenced a lot of people, unfortunately, with those prison writings. And when he was in prison, he asked the question, and a lot of Marxists did. He said, why did Marx's prediction, Karl Marx's prediction, not work out? Why did the workers of the world not rise up and revolt against the upper class? What happened? And he concluded that the workers never took over because the capitalist ideas were embedded in all the institutions of civil society. So you can't tear down capitalism because the ideas of capitalism, it's everywhere. It's not just in the marketplace. And he highlighted in particular the institutions of, or the ideas of capitalism are embedded in the family, the church, and the education system. Right? So it was the culture of Western society that was blocking the workers from rising up. And it wasn't even preventing the workers from rising up and tearing down the upper class. It was preventing the workers from even knowing that they needed to rise up. Right? It was capitalism, and these capitalist institutions were distorting their consciousness. They didn't have a proper consciousness of how oppressed they really were. Okay? That was Gramsci. He had this line, he said, the state was only an outer ditch behind which there stood a powerful system of fortresses. These fortresses are the institutions that we have in America. Right? That's why you hear the left talk about we must dismantle. Right? They're talking about dismantling these fortresses, in particular the church. Gramsci said, unless and until Western culture is de-Christianized. Western society will never be decapitalized. You with me? So he says we can't get rid of capitalism until we get rid of this whole Christian thing. The end goal, and this is a worthy reminder, the end goal, excuse me, of all these people is to end capitalism. That's it. That's the point of this all, is to end capitalism. Oh, and they put a nice little wrapping around it, a nice bow on top, and pretend like that's not what it's really all about. But that's the point of it. This is the founder of Black Lives Matter, Patrisse Cullors, saying the same, telling you that's what her point is. Here she is.
Am I a Marxist? I'm a lot of things. I do believe in Marxism. It's a philosophy that I learned really early on in my organizing career. We were taught to learn about the systems that were criticizing capitalism. We were taught to understand why there were philosophies that were criticizing capitalism.
Okay, you with me? All right, that's the point. Now, what will communism look like in America? I don't know, but the point is just a bigger and bigger government controlling more and more of your life, more and more of the economy. That's all Black Lives Matter wants. They don't care about black lives. Just look at their endorsement of the teachers' unions that are against charter schools. They don't care about black lives. They want to tear down capitalism. They're all Marxists. The founder of Black Lives Matter just told you. Like, this is not some weird conspiracy. I just played a clip of the founder telling you she's a Marxist. And these Marxists, to overthrow capitalism, they need to tear down the fortresses of culture. Gramsci said, in the new order, socialism will triumph. This is his quote, his words. Socialism will triumph by first capturing the culture via the infiltration of schools, universities, churches, and the media by transforming the consciousness of society. Are you with me? All right, I got one last point I can make here. And once you understand this, you'll see it everywhere, and a lot of things will start to make more sense. The way to do this, the way to tear down these fortresses and these institutions, the march through the institutions, that's Gramsci. The way to do this is not to flatten the system, but to flip it. Okay? The way to do this, the way to overthrow these systems is not to flatten the systems, but to flip it. Martin Luther King Jr., he wanted to flatten the system, right? He wanted all men to be judged by the content of their character. He wants to flatten everything out. Gramsci said, no, that's not what we're doing. Obviously, Gramsci came before him, okay, but he's like, no, we need to flip the system on its head completely. He called it a periphery-centered society, right? So periphery means the outside. We need a periphery-centered society. So the outsider has to be turned to the insider, the underdog into the overlords, and the oppressed into the oppressors. And this is what Ibram X. Kendi, author of How to Be an Anti-Racist, that's what he says. He says, the way to solve past discrimination is present discrimination, and the way to solve present discrimination is future discrimination. So he's not asking for the end of discrimination. He's calling for different discrimination. That's having a periphery-centered society. To someone with a Marxist worldview, which these leaders have, the goal is not really equality or equity. Their goal is oppression. It's just their form of it. This is why we have Pride Month. Pride Month? And by the way, this is Pride Month, which is upcoming. October is Gay Pride History Month. They got 2 months. How did the gay lobby get 2 months out of the year? They're 2 to 4% of the population. Gay people are about 2 to 4% of the population. How did that? That's a centering of the periphery. The periphery has become the center, right? Like gay people, 2 to 4% of the population. But now every logo in the country is the rainbow flag. But now even gay isn't periphery enough. This is why we have the obsession with transgender, right? It's the pushing of the periphery. We got to go more peripheral of the periphery. We got to go to the periphery's periphery and then center that in order to really flip and upend our cultural consciousness. So the oppressed have to become the oppressors, and the former oppressors now have to have all their privileges taken away. We're not just trying to flatten society, we're trying to flip it around. And the people who go along with this are being taken for a ride. I got 2 examples here. First, look at this woman here just think of how bonkers this clip is here. And just play.
White people are racist. So I put this up because I really want any white person in the room to know up front that this is what we're dealing with, that it's not going to be this coddling of white tears and what that looks like. We're not going to discuss, oh, maybe some of us have worked it out. No, you're always going to be racist, actually. So even when you're on your path to trying to figure out how to be a better human being, because I believe that white people are born into not being human, like that actually, instead of people of color and black folks being dehumanized, that actually everyone is dehumanized off rip within white supremacy, that y'all are born into a life to not be human, and that's what y'all are taught to do, to be demons. So in this particular way, white people are all racist.
Yes, yes. Makes a lot of sense, lady. Thank you. By the way, did you see on the paper there, it said PayPal me, and had her PayPal account. So here you have a very overweight black woman in a room full of old white women. That person her whole life has been on the periphery. She's been on the periphery of society for many different reasons, but now she's centered. She literally has the stage. She has the center of the stage, people watching her. That's the periphery being centered. And then watch this poor girl. Looks like a high schooler. Maybe she's in college. I don't know. Here.
This is kind of scary because I only realized this a couple of days ago, and I've only come out to a few people. I'm a guy. I use he, they pronouns, and I'm gonna go by Theo. I told my mom today, and I have to go home every day and be called my dead name and have she, her pronouns used every time I go home. And no one realizes how hurtful it is. It's like a slap in the face. And I dyed my hair last night so I could feel more masculine, and I was afraid I was going to get thrown out of the house. We love you, Theo. We love you.
We're going to spend more time on that video in particular. How about, she says, I just realized a couple days ago, I'm a guy, right? But here she is, clearly a girl who her whole life has been on the periphery for different reasons. And now she's centered with the megaphone, surrounded by people applauding her and cheering her and hugging her. So this is a periphery-centered society. Gramsci said socialism is precisely the religion that must kill Christianity. Wokeism is that religion. Yesterday on the show, we talked a bit about inflation. And it's going to be horrible. People are going to freak out. Listen, we've talked a bit. I'm sure you've heard about the price of lumber. Lumber is really expensive. Not everyone's connected with that, right? If you're building a house or something, then you're directly connected and you see that. You're like, holy cow. But everyone's connected with food or whatever. Like, so when food prices go through the roof, when people's 401ks are half of what they were yesterday, there's going to be a lot of panic. And I don't want to deal with people when they're panicking. Right? You want to stay away from that. You want to stay safe. I don't want to be in line with a bunch of freaking out people because no one can afford food. I'm really worried about inflation. MyPatriotSupply.com has everything you need for emergency food preparedness. Listen, maybe inflation doesn't speak to you. Maybe you don't think it's going to be a thing or whatever. Fine. There's going to be a natural disaster. I live in California. There's going to be an earthquake. Right? You live wherever. There's going to be a hurricane. There's going to be a blizzard. There's going to be something where you'd rather just not even go out and you stay home and stay safe. So get the 4-week supply from My Patriot Supply. It's just part of being an adult. It's just like what you do as an adult. You get the 1-year supply and you're the man. But at least get the 4-week supply. They also have seeds and microgreens, which are awesome. And every other emergency thing you might need. Flashlights, water filtration is a big deal. I love that. Putin's meeting with Russia. Biden's meeting with Putin tomorrow. And Putin, doing all this ransomware stuff, attacking our infrastructure. We saw last week, oil pipelines and our beef infrastructure. Why not our water infrastructure? Water infiltration is a smart thing to get. My Patriot Supply. But we got a website for you, preparewiththefirst.com. Preparewiththefirst.com, and you get 25% off their 4-week food supply. Just get it done. Preparewiththefirst.com. Coming up next, I got some really, really good news about COVID, and perhaps even our grand finale good news story out of the whole thing. Do it coming up next. True story. Mike Slater, Spread the Word. Hey, Slider Crusaders, we got all good COVID news to share. Here in California, you don't have to wear masks anymore if you're a customer at a restaurant or anywhere else in California. People still will because they're sheep, but you don't have to. We got more and more studies coming out. Oh, by the way, the state of emergency is still in effect as well. We'll talk about that another day in California because Gavin Newsom still needs to have his power and control for as long as possible. But we got another study coming out that says, and more studies coming out, that COVID, if you get COVID, if you've gotten COVID and recover from it, that gives you just as much immunity as the vaccine. But still, no one's talking about including those people as if they were vaccinated, right? Even though they're just as protected. So for instance, let's say a concert says, oh, you have to prove you're vaccinated. Prove you're vaccinated. Why not also say prove you're vaccinated or prove that you have the antibodies because you're just as immune and just as protected? We're not even having that conversation still in America. Why not? Why are so many Democrats in particular so interested in getting everyone jabbed as opposed to just seeing who has immunity, which is the point, right? This is some great news out of a medical journal. Young infants produce strong immune response to COVID. Study finds fantastic. Praise God for that. Could you imagine if babies and infants, I mean, my third child was born in February of 2020, right? So like right in the midst of this whole thing. Could you imagine if infants were getting sick from COVID? And in fact, it's quite the opposite. They're some of the most immune and have the strongest immune response in a really good way. That's fantastic. I want to debunk a study now. This is a study done a year ago. And they concluded that wearing face masks prevented 77,000 infections in Italy and 66,000 infections in New York City over a 1-month period. Okay, so this is very on, well, it wasn't that early, it was a year ago. It was like June 12th. So it was literally like a year ago Friday or whatever, a year ago Saturday was this study was published. This is CNN. The best way to reduce coronavirus transmission is by wearing a face mask, study says. Now, clearly, that's a ridiculous headline and conclusion because it's not the best way. The best way to reduce your transmission is to hide in a bunker and never leave. So this isn't the best way. It might be a way, but it can't be the best way. Now, it turns out it's barely even a way. Finally, 1 year later, people, scientists, researchers are coming out and being critical of this study. The guy's conclusions were way off, and the methodology was so far off that there are 40 scientists and researchers who have signed a letter calling for the journal to retract it. And their comments about this article are brutal. And this isn't a slight disagreement on a thing or two in the study. That's fine, that's normal. These are researchers saying this thing is garbage and it's so irredeemably bad, it needs to be entirely retracted. Now, the study was written by a Nobel Prize winning chemist at UC San Diego. He won the Nobel Prize in 1995 for his research on chlorofluorocarbons destroying the ozone layer, which first of all, what have you done for me lately? Am I right? Nobel Prize, 1995? I mean, come on, man. Second, that will also turn out to be false. All that ozone layer freaking out too, but we'll save that for a different day. The open letter says the claims presented in this study, again, the study says that you need to wear a mask, and masks are wonderful and awesome and save this many infections and this many lives. The claims presented in this study are dangerously misleading and lack any basis in evidence. This is an epidemiologist at Johns Hopkins University, so people are putting their names to this to retract this. There were just so many errors and issues with the paper that it almost seems hard to know where to start. Now, there's a little trick in this thing as well. The National Academy of Sciences, which is where this paper was published in their journal, they have a peer review process. Normally, the journal editors pick independent experts to vet the paper before publication. But if you're an Academy member, then you can submit 2 papers a year where you select the reviewers yourself. So I don't know who this guy picked or what their connections are, but this guy could have picked his cousin and his wife to review the paper, and shockingly, they agree with him. Made up bunk science. And what's so frustrating is that we may never know what did work, right? Because all we're gonna do is we'll be looking at New York and California, right? New York, California over here, and Texas and Florida over here, completely different approaches. And in the end, they had the same case numbers and same death rates and all the rest. New York was the worst death per capita behind New Jersey. California was 30th, and Florida and Texas were 26th and 24th. So it's like, well, what worked? What worked, what didn't work? Vox wrote an article the other day. They said, did none of these state policies matter? Was the virus going to spread no matter what states did? Was it all for nothing? And it's impossible to make these grand conclusions on what interventions worked and what didn't, because COVID hit different places at different times. We're a very big country. There's a ton of other different variables at play, like climate, population density, the health of a population, right? 40% of people who were sick, 40% of people who were hospitalized were either overweight or obese. So there's different health statistic variables that need to be calculated in. It's impossible to come to any grand conclusions about the country. But still, Vox, while they're rightfully questioning all these state interventions and what worked and what didn't, they ended their article with the one COVID intervention that definitely worked was mask mandates. You're like, what? Were they using the Nobel Prize winners study to come to that conclusion that that's the one thing that definitely worked? Come on, guys. All right, changing gears. We've talked about COVID a lot less lately, and for good reason. We're done with it. It's done. It's over. Now, of course, there's political implications and lessons to be learned, no doubt about it, but COVID is over. And this is my triumphant COVID is over story. March 23rd, 2020, there was a pilot, a Delta airline pilot, and he was given his mission for the day. He was to fly from Minneapolis Airport to VCV. The airport code was VCV. And he thought, VCV, what in the world what's VCV? He had to look it up. Victorville. Victorville is this tiny little town that has an airport in the middle of the desert in Southern California. So he was in Minneapolis. It was right in the beginning of the whole pandemic. The airport was empty. Obviously, no one was on the plane, and he flew it to Victorville. And people were just starting to talk about a 2-week lockdown. This is when the whole pandemic was just starting to sink in. A 2-week lockdown. Wow. The pilot says he didn't understand, really, it didn't all sink in until he started to land in the desert there and he saw all the planes lined up. And he said, it's just a giant parking lot. He said he couldn't believe. He said it was like an optical illusion. It was an apocalyptic optical illusion. Just airplanes parked as far as the eye could see, going and going into the distance. So as he saw these airplanes, by the way, all he could think of were the jobs. He could think of flight attendants, ticket agents, rental people, tourism, hotels, and families who couldn't visit with each other anymore. So he parked his plane to begin a 14-day stretch in Victorville. 14 days, 2 weeks to flatten the curve, right? And even then, 14 days was a shocking amount of time. And he pulled out a tiny cocktail napkin and he wrote a note on it and tucked it into the tray table in the cockpit. 435 days later, another pilot landed in Victorville and started his mission to get the planes up and going again and get them back in the air, get people's lives moving, reunite those families. And as that new pilot was checking everything to make sure it was all working, he pulled open the tray table in the cockpit and a napkin fell out. One that was put there 435 days ago. The napkin said, "Hey pilots, it's March 23rd, just arrived from Minneapolis. Very chilling to see so many of our fleet here in the desert. If you are here to pick it up, then the light must be at the end of the tunnel." Amazing how fast it changed. Have a safe flight, bringing it out of storage. We've reached the light. There's not even a light at the end of the tunnel. We're out of the tunnel. We've reached the light. Far longer than we hoped and far longer than it needed to be. But it's over. So now, here's to you, having a safe flight out of storage and back to flying again. Coming up next, we'll talk about how we are a republic, not a democracy. It's of the utmost importance. We'll talk about that next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Sunday Crusaders. Last week, Joe Biden was with the G7 country leaders. Yesterday, he was with NATO, getting ready for tomorrow's meeting with Putin, which is going to be an absolute disaster. Here's a clip of Biden yesterday bad-mouthing half the country.
I think it's appropriate to say that the Republican Party is vastly diminished in numbers. The leadership of the Republican Party is fractured, and the Trump wing of the party is the bulk of the party, but it makes up a significant minority of the American people.
So first of all, bad form. Second of all, is that even true? Adam Brandon is here, author of the new book. It comes out today. Forward by Nigel Farage, Republic, Not a Democracy, How to Restore Sanity in America. He's the president of FreedomWorks, Adam Brandon. Adam, how are you, sir?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm very happy I'm not in Brussels with Biden, that's for sure.
Well, congratulations on the book coming out today. So first of all, let's talk about the difference between a republic and a democracy. This is of the utmost importance, and I know conservatives are pretty good on this point of pointing it out, but we really deeply need to understand the difference and why it matters that we are a republic and not a democracy.
It goes back to something Plato said. Plato wrote a book called The Republic over 2,000 years ago in ancient Athens. And in it, he said, before you have a dictatorship, before you have that problem, you always start with a pure democracy. So before the tyranny, you have the democracy. Well, why is that? Because when you have a pure democracy where 51% of people get to decide what they do to the other 49% of the people, you have some of these other things in human nature of absolute power corrupts absolutely comes in. And we have a system that's built to protect minority rights, not trample on them. And so as we move to a democracy, that stability that has lasted this country for 250 years, it goes out the window.
We're going to talk about the filibuster coming up in the next segment, but can you give another example of where Democrats are leaning too heavy on democracy and abandoning the republic?
We have a history of people in this country who have fought in our foreign wars overseas and for our right to vote. Everyone who's a U.S. citizen should have a right to vote. But there's a big difference between me deciding I want to be an active participant in this Republican form of democracy. I'm going to go sign up to vote. I'm going to go show up on election day. That's what our soldiers have fought for, versus I'm going to sit on my butt eating Cheetos all day, but I expect someone to register me to vote and deliver me a ballot on election day. That is an example of a democracy where the idea is to get everyone to vote. And when you do that, you cheapen the whole exercise. Our system is supposed to be people who want to take just a little bit of personal action to get themselves to vote. And one of the things that HR 1 that is I think one of the reasons it's being ground down is when you tell people it effectively bans voter ID, it only has 30% approval rating. And to get that bill passed, they'll have to wreck the filibuster. And then once you do that, once the filibuster is gone, what's the purpose of even having a Senate?
Yeah, and Democrats talk about lowering the voting age, and I hear that, and I think, no, if anything, we need to be talking about raising the voting age, among some other protections. So you talk about different issues in the book. I want to focus on this one. You call it the age demographic crisis. Yep. Explain that to me.
Well, if you look at America is getting to be an older country. We've traditionally been a younger country. And so electorally, since my job revolves around politics, what that means to me is that you have to start our goal should be nothing less than winning the popular vote, like hands down. And when I look back in recent years with what Trump was able to do, he set records in reaching out to new demographics, whether it's Black or Hispanic. And that's something that needs to continue to be a key focus, because as demographics shift in America, you have to reach these new audiences. And I'm a firm believer that our values, our principles will play very well. It's just a lot of the effort that needs to happen to get in there. I think too often people think that like the Hispanic America is this one group. Hispanic America, you have Cuban Americans, you have Venezuelan Americans, you have Mexican Americans, and those that came in legally and through the system, they are not tethered to the Democratic Party. And I think in the next few years, you're going to start seeing 50+% of the Hispanic vote starting to move over to the conservative side. And that's going to fundamentally change our electoral possibilities for a generation.
That'd be amazing. And if we could ever do that with people who come here illegally, Nancy Pelosi would be building that wall as quickly as possible to make sure that doesn't happen anymore. To win this popular vote, and particularly with younger people, and you can break it down to race or if you want to, but younger people, do you think it's issues, principles, or style that the Republican Party needs to improve on? Or maybe I'll put it the next candidate in 2024. Is it how they approach these things, or should they just be talking issues? Where do you stand?
I think it's a little bit of a mix of all of the above, because I'm also predicting right now. I spent some time in this book because I actually wrote a book, and then COVID happened. And then so the book that I wrote reflected the pre-COVID world. So I had to start over again. Yeah. So I spent time after the election scrambling to rewrite this from scratch. But I wrote a chapter about inflation, looking back at Nixon, and then off the gold standard, and then how that kind of came to a pinnacle under Carter, and then Reagan had to come through and fix all the inflation problem, as almost of, hey, we've been here before. If inflation peaks up, we know what to do. But I also think it's important I mention that because Reagan was the last president to win the college vote, and so Reagan absolutely was a great communicator. I think it's also, though, some of the problems that you're facing in society right now. If you can do a very good job of communicating a very optimistic message about America's future that's based on liberty. I mean, I always think about it with the last conversation I had with Andrew Breitbart. He told me, if you can't sell liberty, you suck. And I think there is a certain amount of that we have an opportunity to reach these new audiences if you have a positive vision. And frankly, I think seeing what the Biden agenda is laying out, I'm not so sure people are liking what I think there's a lot of buyer's remorse. Hence, you see a lot of these big bills starting to get bogged down in the Senate this summer.
Yeah, I got about 1 minute here, and this is a huge question. The culture war, right? So oftentimes when you talk about liberty, especially to a younger audience, they do that as like a very libertarian, like live and let live. And then you end up seeing, drag queens on Blue's Clues on Nick Jr., Right. So then the like more social conservatives come in and they're like, no, this is wrong, and so there's like this battle here between these different sides, even within the party. So what's the future of the social conservative movement with young people?
So I'm a fusionist. At this point in my career, I tend to think you need everyone in the conservative boat together. So if you're an 80% friend, I consider you a great friend. I'm also a new parent. And I don't even know when I'm going to allow my kid to go on television for that exact reason that you said, the indoctrination that's happening both through the media and at home. I'm a very much a live and let live kind of person. At the same time, I'm also very much don't bring your personal agenda into my house. So I think there is a certain amount where I think things are starting to evolve to. And I wish there was more time to get into this, but I came into this movement as an economics guy, but I've become a cultural guy because I think the cultural war has shifted when you start seeing things like woke and cancel culture and critical race theory that start to predominate. I'm never going to be able to talk about my economic issues if being a capitalist is now considered being racist. So I'm now one who, if I was going to start a new book today, that's actually what I would focus on, is that the new economic fight is actually a cultural fight.
We came here the exact same way, too. We have the same path. Let's definitely talk some more. Adam Brandy is the president of Wonderful Freedom Works. New book out today, Republic, Not a Democracy, How to Restore Sanity in America. We need it. Adam, appreciate your time, man.
Hey, appreciate it. We'll see you again soon.
Have a great day. Yeah, of course, Freedom Works is the organization. Come back with our friend Adam Carrington. We'll talk about the filibuster. Latest with that. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Society Crusaders, Mitch McConnell was on Hugh Hewitt's radio show yesterday talking about Supreme Court. Here's.
If you regain the majority in 2022 for the Republicans, and there's a very good chance of that happening, I'll come back to the individual races in a second. With the rule that you applied in 2016, of the Scalia vacancy apply in 2024 to any vacancy that occurred then?
Well, I think in the middle of a presidential election, if you have a Senate of the opposite party of the president, you have to go back to the 1880s to find the last time a vacancy was filled. So I think it's highly unlikely. In fact, no, I don't think either party, if it were different from the president, would confirm a Supreme Court nominee in the middle of an election.
It's true. I like how he said either side wouldn't do it. Our friend Adam Carrington's here from Hillsdale College. Adam, long time no talk. How are you, brother?
Doing well. Glad to be back with you.
Good to talk to you. So I'm trying to not be a hypocrite, right? So I'm trying to remember what the stance was in the last couple of Supreme Court nominees. So what's the standard that's been, I should say?
Yes, that's the question. Well, I will say that Mitch McConnell is being consistent with what he said in 2016. I went back and looked that up for an article I wrote a while back. And he did say that one of the conditions is there unified government or at least Senate control consistent with the presidency. The practice itself has, of course, included moments where Democratic Congresses or Senates have approved Republican nominees. Clarence Thomas was one example. But the consistency is, yes, McConnell is right that if you combine opposite party control and an election year, a presidential election year, it hasn't been since the 1880s. But that does obscure that there have been non-election years where opposite party senates have acted on presidential nominees.
Wonderful nuance there that I did not pick up on. Very, very good. Love that. It's been too long, Adam. That's why I'm glad you're here. Okay, because again, I'm trying not to be a hypocrite. So the standard. Okay, so I'm trying to think. If Joe Biden is the president and he had a Democratic Senate and they nominated a justice, I'd be like, oh, that stinks for Republicans. Bummer, right? I wouldn't do what the Democrats did with the last Supreme Court nominee and be like, oh, Republicans, you just shouldn't even nominate it. You shouldn't approve, because just be nice. Just, don't even, it's like, no. If you have control of the Senate and the president, you should put your person through. Is that a okay stance to hold?
I think,
even if it's an election year.
I think it is, and it's because that's what the Constitution says that they have the power to do, and that they should go forward and do it. I think the only question I would just add that you might get into if you start getting, especially outside of election years and holding nominees, is we do want a Supreme Court that functions. And if Congress believes that it functions best with 9 members, as they have legally by statute had since 1869, we just need to keep in mind of making sure that it's consistent with that it's consistent with a broader question of allowing the court to function the way they want it to.
Yeah, that's tricky. So we almost have to think of this ahead of time, because let's say he can nominate someone tomorrow, right? Someone passes away and nominates. Republicans could make the argument, well, let's just wait till the next election. And it's like, no. Like the next election is years away from now, right?
Exactly. That's even more succinctly put than I said.
Yeah, interesting. Adam, listen, it's been forever, and that's all the time we have. I'm bummed. You got 20 seconds if you want to make a comment on the filibuster.
I think the filibuster was meant to have good debate. It's now been used to stop the legislative majorities from getting their way. I think we need to find some way to mend it, to have debate, and get it back to its original purpose.
Which is what number?
I think finding less a number and finding a way that it's not used to block legislation, but to let everyone have their say and then have a vote, not to kill legislation by talking it to death in any instance.
Okay, that deserves more time and historical analysis. We'll do it again. Adam Carrington from Hillsdale College. Thanks, Adam.
Thank you.
Appreciate you, man. Have a great day. Coming up tomorrow, we'll talk about who are the types of people who critical race theory appeals to. I got it down to 3 groups: the suckers, the narcissists, and the grifters. We'll talk about all 3 of those groups on tomorrow's show. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word.